Never read the comments. Well, unless you want to see absolutely salty tears from your rivals. Our last video was on SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey and what he may or may not be looking for when it comes to the Southeastern Conference adding football teams. I'll give a quick recap on that in just a moment. But our comments on that video were filled with Gator fans who were absolutely as salty as possible at some of the comments we made in the video. Now, we were just relaying what Commissioner Sankey had said. Again, his two big takeaways were that he was looking for somebody that did not expand the SEC's regionality and also programs and teams that were fully invested in all sports, especially football. We took that as a sign. We took that as a signal that he was talking about teams like Florida State and Clemson and maybe a few others here in the Southeast, but there just aren't a lot of teams that fit that description outside of the Noles and Tigers. Maybe some would say Oklahoma State. Some have argued for maybe a North Carolina, Virginia Tech. I don't know. There aren't many is the big takeaway there. And so if that's the case, it sounded like Commissioner Sankey was endorsing the Noles or maybe the Tigers to be in the SEC soon. Well, Gator fans were pretty upset with this video, and so we're going to tell you exactly why they were upset here today. We don't know when conference realignment will take its next form, take its next shape. We don't know what that timetable looks like. We've talked about conference realignment in a lot of different angles and aspects. We've got another video coming this week, so make sure you're locked in with the channel on it. But what we do know is that something is coming, and whether that's 3 to 5 years from now or in 2036 when the grant of rights is up, something is coming, and Florida State and Clemson will not be in the ACC forever. What we do know is that Gator fans are absolutely terrified of FSU making it to the SEC, or even the Big Ten for that matter, but especially the SEC. Check out any social media post about FSU going to another conference. Check out any comment section on YouTube. In fact, come back to this video later and read the comments for some absolutely butthurt UF fans if you'd like to point and laugh at them. Or go on any message board and anywhere they're talking about conference realignment, Gator fans are sure to be there crying their eyes out through their typing whenever someone brings up the possibility of Florida State joining the SEC. They go into a blind rage almost about how Bobby Bowden picked the ACC and how they hope we wallow in the ACC mediocrity forever. And it's really just kind of funny to watch. They're bringing up stuff from over 30 years ago and bringing up standards and metrics of things that just didn't matter back then. The SEC was not the conference in the early 90s that it certainly is today. Anyway, just hilarious to look at and hilarious to watch. But you want to know why they're so upset about it, why they're so scared of it, why they're so passionate about Florida State not making the SEC? It's because they're absolutely terrified of what we will do on an equal playing field. Do you guys realize how successful Florida State has been when compared with UF since the Noles joined the ACC? It's not even been close. You could go back to the 50s and 60s when Florida had a ton of success, when Florida State was a brand new program. And yes, if you want to build an argument based on what happened before you were alive, that's totally fine. But if you look at recent history and you look at college football over the last 3 or so decades, certainly since Coach Bowden was at Florida State has been the better program. And it really hasn't been close these last 30 years or so. The teams are tied in national championship wins, and that's the only place they're tied in. Florida State has been in more championship games themselves than Florida has. Florida State has more Heisman winners over the last 30 or so years than Florida has. Florida State also has more conference championships. They have more bowl wins, which, again, if you want to say conference championships shouldn't matter because maybe the SEC is tougher to win, whatever. Florida State has more bowl wins. They have more BCS and New Year's Six bowls that they've been to. Florida State has more consensus All-Americans in the last 30 or so years. And yes, since Florida State joined the ACC, they own the head-to-head record. Now, it's close, but it's 16, 14, and 1. And we'll go ahead and count that one, the choke at Doak, as a win for Florida State. Florida State has had 4 coaches in the span of joining the ACC. Florida has had 4 coaches since 2010. Florida fans know that there's a monster in Tallahassee. They love to cry little brother because of games that happened well before any of us were alive, but they know the hell that would await them if Florida State didn't have to do more with less. Florida fans are the petulant rich kid who they're given absolutely everything, and somehow they still do worse than the scrappy little kid from down the block. Before we keep going, I do want to give some love to our friends over at Garnet and Gold. If you're an FSU fan, you know you're shopping for FSU merch and gear online. Make sure that you're doing that at garnetandgold.com. They are the absolute best when it comes to Florida State apparel, merchandise. They take care of our athletes through NIL, and they also give back to our boosters. Make sure you use code NOSLAW, that's NOSLAW, to get 15% off of your order at garnetandgold.com. If you're local to Tallahassee, you can also order at garnetandgold.com. You can go in and do an in-store pickup to save on shipping, but make sure that you are supporting garnetandgold.com. Now, what ends up happening with conference realignment? We've done several videos on this. Will Commissioner Sankey end up taking Florida State, Clemson, others in the ACC, others outside of the ACC? I'm not sure. What I do think we all know, and I do think we're all pretty confident on, is that something is coming. There's lots of rumors about what's going on with Colorado and the Big 12, and will that force other teams in the ACC to try and jump because they see some of those Pac-12 teams leaving? I'm not sure. But I do know that soon we should get news on what will happen here. And I know that Florida fans are absolutely terrified and do not want Florida State to wind up in the SEC. They love to be able to say, oh, they would never be able to compete in a conference like this. They would never be able to win here. Meanwhile, they're on their 3rd straight back-to-back losing season coming up this year, and they're not able to compete there either. Florida has lost to every SEC team that they've played over the last 3 years, and it is pretty remarkable to see how far that program has fallen. I saw a tweet this morning talking about the late 2000s SEC championships between Florida and Alabama, and those absolutely great dogfights and huge matchups that went down, and that's just not reality anymore. That's just not happening. Meanwhile, outside of a pretty bad stint where Florida State had Willie Taggart and then the first couple of years of Mike Norvell trying to rebuild what was once a proud program, Florida State has done very, very well against the SEC. We've already told you about what they've done head-to-head with the Gator since being in the ACC. Obviously, a big win against LSU last year, a big matchup with them coming up this year as well. But Florida State also has wins over Alabama, Ole Miss, Auburn, Kentucky, and others, just to say the least, South Carolina, and others. Florida State has done very, very well against the SEC since joining the conference that they're in, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't continue that if they were in that conference. To tell you the truth, the SEC gets a lot of shine, and they're a good conference, but a lot of it's what Alabama and Georgia have really done to carry that conference over the last several years. LSU's been a really good team as well, but outside of LSU, Georgia, Alabama, who strikes fear into your heart as a Florida State fan in that conference? Well, certainly not Florida. Tennessee looks like they might be coming back, but they're not a program that worries me at all. Are you worried about Vandy or either one of the Mississippi schools? Texas A&M is an absolute dumpster fire, and who cares about Kentucky? Yeah, I just don't really worry about many of those SEC programs like Missouri and even Oklahoma and Texas that are coming in. And so this narrative around Florida State could not compete here is false, and it would be proven false, and Gator fans would be wrong again if Florida State wound up in the SEC. I'm not sure why they're so terrified of this. If anything else, if they're so right and Florida State could never compete and could never get close to what Florida does in the SEC, then they should welcome the Noles to the SEC so that the Noles could just be a doormat and could never really compete for anything seriously. But in their heart of hearts, they know that's not the case. They know that's not the truth. They've seen what Florida State has done when they've matched up against SEC opponents for the last 30 years, and they know what would happen. Florida State would come in, and they would be mentioned in the likes of the LSUs, the Alabamas, and the Georgias. I don't know if Florida will ever get back to national relevance. They're pretty much a dumpster fire this year coming up. I think they hired an absolute dud in Sunbelt Billy Napier. You saw what LSU did, went out and hired a very good, proven coach and didn't even give their guy that was in their state a second look. I think Florida's kind of dead as a program, and I think they know that if we make the SEC, they're never coming back, and we will take that spot. All in all, it's fun to look at. It's fun to think about. It's fun to laugh at their fans who are, again, terrified of what will happen if the Noles make the SEC. What are your thoughts? Let's talk about it down below. Let's talk about it in the comments. Again, if you comment now, if you see this early, come back in a day or two. I promise you, when the Gator fans find this video, they will be in tears watching it. Share it with your favorite Gator fan or your least favorite Gator fan. Tag them in it on social media. Send it to your group chats. Let's have some fun with this one. Appreciate you guys as always for watching. If you've missed any of our conference realignment videos, we put them all into one playlist for you. You can check them out right here.